Welcome to the Bigger Cashflow podcast, where we interview business owners and real estate investors that share tips and tricks on how to grow your cash flow and reach financial freedom.
Welcome to another episode of the Bigger Cashflow podcast. Today I'm very excited to share with you guys our special guest, Michael Zuber from One Rental at a Time. Michael has been in the tech industry for over 20 years, and he has built a portfolio of rentals. He has retired in February 2018. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you, Bo. Thank you for having me. It should be a very fun show, I hope.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So why don't we jump right in and tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're currently doing in terms of real estate and cash flow activities.
Yeah, so when you really think about it, I think my story begins like most. I was in a very busy job. Mine was probably busier than most. And what I mean by that is not only did I spend a lot of working hours, but my job took me all over the world. I spent, some years 200,000 miles a year on airplanes. I spent 100 nights in hotels. I had a small family with a daughter who was precious. And, I just realized that I couldn't do that forever. I realized that the career I had chosen is very high stressed. Yes, it could be rewarding financially, but it wasn't something that sort of fed my soul. It wasn't something that made me feel good at the end of the day, if that makes any sense to you. Mm-hmm. So I had to find a way to be financially free. I wasn't an athlete. I'm not a singer. I wasn't going to be an inventor. I did try my hand at the stock market when I was in my 20s. That went really well until it didn't. And, I remember, back in the day, we didn't have Amazon, right? So I drove to a bookstore and just stalked the aisles because I just knew there had to be an answer. And I think like many people in my age bracket, stumbled across Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and that changed my life, right? It spoke to me on many levels, even to the point where they were talking about in that book, that first condo, I think it was Kim, that she bought and produced $100 and that story. All of that kind of resonated with me. And I sort of declared that I was going to be a landlord and I was going to own rental properties and all of that. I realized I had to do it different than most books. There's lots of books out there on try to real estate investing and landlording and all of that, but they mainly talked about people being their own landlords, and that just wouldn't work for me, right? Wouldn't work for me for many reasons. First off, my job wouldn't allow me to just pick up the phone at any time and deal with something. Second, I don't have any handy skills by any stretch. I'm not that guy, right? And then lastly, I chose a market, as you mentioned in your intro, 2.5 hours away from where I live. So there's just lots of things that weren't going for me. So, I knew I was going to be a landlord. So I picked a market 2.5 hours away. I remember buying my first house on Norris Drive and just going after it. So I've had a property manager since day one. That's sort of how I did it. And, I think the other thing that some people don't appreciate is I didn't start with a lot of capital, probably more than some, right? I share it all the time. We started with $40,000, but frankly, that's less than most of the people I speak with today. And that's all it took. And then, after 15 years and this whole one rental at a time mentality, we were able to retire financially free. My wife 5 years ago, and myself just about a year ago. In 4 days, I think. So, it's been a lot of fun. So I think, did I miss anything in your question?
No, that was great. And I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty as we kind of reconcile the difference between how you got started and how you grew like a massive portfolio of over 150 rentals. You mentioned the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I think talking with a lot of investors, that is kind of like the beginning how it just changes their mindset in terms of assets and liabilities and creating that cash flow. But, I read it as well. It doesn't give you really, tactical advice in terms of how you should go about doing this. So can you kind of share with our listeners what was like that next step that you took? Were there any other mentors that you sought out? Was it by talking with other investors at RIA groups? Can you kind of share a little bit more about that?
So I dove into, what today would be called YouTube University, which back then was Borders University, right? Borders was a brick and mortar bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been gone for 5 years now, but it's the same idea, right? I have a library, or had a library, of well over 100 books that I consumed, right? One of the luxuries of my job is I was on the plane all the time. So what do you do on the plane? You either watch movies and you're non-productive, or I just consumed endless amounts of books and material. I went online and found everything I could. My schedule, unfortunately, did not permit me to make very many RIA meetings, right? Because they're usually scheduled. They're scheduled, every Monday at 5:30. The first Monday, all of that, and there was every chance in the world that I'd be on the other side of the planet. Lots of times when those were coming. So we just dove in. We used the books that we did. As for the next step, I think what we had to answer was, what was a deal, right? What was a deal, right? Because you could go on the MLS at any time, at any point, in any city, and there's lots of real estate for sale. The fact is, most of that is not good for investors. What I mean by not good, meaning it's not profitable, right? It might be great for owner-occupants, but that's not what I was trying to do, right? I was trying to buy rentals and cash flow and all of that. So I had to figure out what a deal was. And one of the things that I came across in the beginning that I no longer use today, but we're talking about my beginning story, is the 1% rule, right? What that boiled down to was, hey, if the house rented for $1,000, you could pay up to $100,000, right? And that's what I believed. And that was the first house we brought on 1818 Norris Drive in Fresno. You can look it up if you like in Zillow. I paid $107,000 for that, and it rented for $10.95. So that was the first thing I had to answer was, okay, you're not going to be able to invest in the Bay Area. The Bay Area has been ridiculous ever since I've been here, and that's been nearly 45, 50 years. So I found Fresno, 2.5 hours away. It was the first market of size that made sense with the 1% rule. I remember driving down there, all nervous and excited at the same time. I didn't know anybody. That's the other thing that sometimes people don't get, is I knew nobody in Fresno. I had never been to Fresno, never even heard of Fresno. Right? I was a Silicon Valley boy my entire life, and I'm like, well, I got to go because that was the market that made sense, and we bought that Norris Drive house for $107 that rented for $10.95, and that was the beginning of some fun.
Sounds like you had a very tough W-2 job, your day job, but then you were able to integrate this real estate investing on the side. Can you talk a little bit about what your mindset was like while you were working? Did you think about, quitting right away or retiring with real estate? Because I think these are kind of questions that a lot of new investors have in their mind, and certainly I have in my mind as well. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so first and foremost, for most people, certainly if you're listening to this and you're in the Bay Area like you and I are, or you have a six-figure job, again, for most people, there's probably an exception or two out there that I have yet to meet. Don't quit your day job. That's not what you should be doing, right? You should use your day job to make as much money as you can. That should be your mindset. So how I tackled it is I got up earlier. I looked at least 6 days a week for 10 years for real estate between 6 and 7 a.m. So before I did any work, before I looked at any emails, before I did anything, I took care of our family first, which meant trying to find the next deal or meet the next person. Because again, when you're starting out, right, and we had $40,000, it was almost 9 months between our first purchase and our second. But I was trying to build a network at that time, right? I was trying to meet 10 or 15 people a week between offers, right? Because that's one thing that other investors don't get, especially if you're investing in a market that's not your backyard, is you need to meet dozens and dozens of people. Real estate is a people business. So even if you go get your first deal and you think you're done for the year, sorry, You need to meet a lot of people. You need to have a lot of conversations. You need to build trust. You need to become a known entity in that market. And you need to do that off hours, right? You need to sacrifice sleep. You need to do these other things. I chose personally because I am a morning person. That is a luxury I have, right? I'm in bed. I'm asleep by 10:30 most of the time. So I just chose to get up earlier and do that first. So that was the first thing I did. I think the first thing I did is went and get a cup of coffee, but then it was real estate. So I don't recommend quitting your job. I think it's a fallacy. I saw a lot of people quit in the peak in '08 because I've been doing this a long time. They were going to become the flippers. Today it's being a wholesaler. Back then it was a flipper. And that doesn't usually work out well, right? So keep doing your job. I would say don't go for the promotions. Don't do all of that. Just be the great single, be what you are today. Just be good at it. And then, get out. Those people above us in the org chart, they're typically not happier, not healthier, they have more stress. I do believe a goal of financial independence and retirement is absolutely awesome. Just don't rush it, right? It took me 15 years. It took my wife 10. But I do not suggest snapping your fingers and being retired. Banks like people that have jobs, and you should, don't give that up, at least in my opinion.
I think that's fantastic advice. I love that advice because I think there's a lot of, advice out on the internet, online that talks about no money deals, which are there, but certainly you need the network, you need the hustle, you need a lot of other things to make that happen. But honestly, having a W-2 job and having your own cash to do deals is really important as a new investor, because nobody's going to just give you money if you're a brand new investor and say, here's $100,000, go buy some houses or whatever. So I think that's fantastic advice. I love that.
There are a lot of strategies out there, and as new investors, you might run into kind of like the shiny penny syndrome in terms of there's like wholesaling, flipping, buy and holds, and commercial, and then also residential. How did you kind of navigate through all that noise, and is there like a strategy that you just stuck with, or did it?
Well, my strategy certainly evolved, and I think one of the things you'll realize once you're in this business for any length of time is the market changes, and if you don't change with the market, you're going to get run over. But we can talk about that next. I believe one of my strengths is being focused, meaning once I make a decision and I'm committed, I go all in, right? So for me, that was single-family homes. Why? Because all the books I told you I read at Borders said buy 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes, 1,500 square feet, 2-car garage with a quarter-acre lot, peaked roof, right? That's all I knew. And right or wrong, that's all I ever looked at in the beginning, right? For the first 5, 6, 7 years, I looked at those houses. Now, I did stumble across the duplex, but it was basically 2 houses on one lot, right? So there was still houses. I own lots of stuff now that's, not just houses, but that's where I started. The thing that you have to realize as a new investor, especially if you have a full-time job, to go back to Joe's question, is just stop the madness. And let me tell you what I mean by that. If you have a full-time job, and we're talking 8 hours a week, at least 5 days a week, you're not going to be a flipper. I don't care what you think, because flipping is a job. And if you think you can flip in another city that's states away, I promise you that's going to end badly, right? You are going to be busy. People are going to take advantage of you, and that is not going to go well. So just stop it. Trying to be trying to be a virtual wholesaler online. Sure, it can work, but you can also spend gobs of money on marketing. Maybe don't have all the systems and scrapers and all these other things that professional wholesalers have. They're going to crush you. But still, you have beginner's luck, and you can come across some stuff, and there are people that show pretty checks and all that stuff. I get it. But again, you have a full-time job. So be very good at your full-time job. Don't let real estate investing become a distraction so you get fired from your job. That's crazy. Do great work between 8 and 5, and then go spend 2 or 3 hours on your side hustle. I recommend rentals because, again, you can buy them periodically. You can pay property managers to watch them. And if you conservatively finance them, you can hold them through any market. If the market we're going into is getting soft, so what? I made a lot of money when the market rolled over and my balance sheet got cut in half, right? My net worth was half. It doesn't matter, people. You don't spend your net worth. You spend your income statement. So when the market rolled over and all these people were losing houses, guess what? Everybody moved into rentals. So my occupancy went up and I raised my rents. So yes, my net worth sucked. It was 50% less, but I didn't care, and nor should you. Only people that care about your net worth are people at cocktail parties. And if we keep trying to impress people we don't care about, we're just being silly. Go buy rentals, conservatively finance them, hold them for the long term, let tenants pay them off, and be happy. Just keep going, and don't get distracted by shiny objects.
You've had this long 15-year career, and you've reached the light at the end of the tunnel, to say. So a lot of people wonder about, there are people who are starting off, there are people kind of in the middle, and then maybe people closer to the end like yourself. Can you talk about those transitions?
Yeah, happy to. And Joe, if we haven't gotten you a copy of my book, I should give it to you, because what we're going to go through here is essentially the first 80 some odd pages.
Oh, fantastic.
So when I started out, I call them 4 phases. So phase 1, new investor, had the $40,000, had to get after it. So I bought Norris Drive, I don't know, pick a month, February. 9 months later, I bought Terrace. 9 months later, I bought something on Ferris. Then my money's gone, right? I did 20 grand, 10 grand, 10 grand, gone. My $40,000 is gone. Not gone, right? They're in equity in houses, but it's out of my bank account. So what I had to do then is I went back and realized that the houses had appreciated, and I did what's called a cash out refinance, right? So I went ahead to the first property, which now I've had for 2 years, maybe two and a half years, and I pulled almost $30,000 or $40,000 out of Norris Drive and went out and bought 2 more properties. That took me the next year. And then, after 12 months go by, I went back and refied Terrace and pulled like 20 grand out. And then I bought another property. And then I went back and refied Ferris. And now we're getting right to the peak of around 2008. I'm looking at our portfolio. I think we have 7 houses in a duplex. And I'm like, I can't buy anything else, right? This is right near the peak, right? Right when Country Ride and IndyMac and all these people are giving these ridiculous mortgages away. And I remember looking over at my wife going, I don't get it, right? I can't believe people were paying this. So for example, just to give you how crazy it was, I told you earlier I bought Norris Drive for $107. You can go to Zillow and see what I sold it for. I think it was $263. The rub is, guess what it rented for? The answer is $1,100, right? Which is what I bought it for. So how can that make sense? So that's where we were at the time in 2000, and maybe it's 2007. And I'm like, honey, I don't know. I mean, if we buy something else, it's going to be an Alligator. It's going to be negative cash flow, and it's going to hurt. And then she goes, well, why do we keep looking at houses? Why don't we look somewhere else? And I'm like, gosh, you're so brilliant and simple. And so we started looking at 5 to 20 unit buildings, and just I don't call it luck. But for example, we did a 1031 exchange out of that Norris Drive house, which we sold for $263, and we bought a 5-unit apartment building for $223. Right, so 40 grand less. And oh, by the way, Norris Drive rented for $1,100, and that 5-unit building rented for $3 grand. So it rented for $40,000 less.
Fantastic.
It rented for almost $2 grand more, and I got a commercial loan with lower interest rates and all that other stuff. So we did that for almost 2 years. So we did a 1031 exchange on every house we owned in the run up, and we went from 8 doors to 80 doors in about an 18-month period. So that's kind of phase 2, right? We again, as I said earlier, the market's going to tell you what to do, and we knew we couldn't retire on 7 or 8 doors, so we did 1031 exchanges, went to 80 doors. Then the world changed, right? Then Bear Stearns goes out of business. Then the financial markets and Country Ride gets bought, and all this other stuff, and Wachovia and all these other banks. That was a horrible time. If you were in the real estate business and you had any kind of friends in the business, it was one of the worst times of my life. And not for us personally, we prospered wonderfully and we had a great time financially, but we had so many friends go bankrupt. We had in not my direct network, but my extended network, people were committing suicide because they lost everything. And it was horrible. I hope to never go through that, even though we came out of it financially far stronger. I never want to see people suffer like that again. It was so traumatic. I'll remember that time for the next 50 years. It was that bad. But, that's kind of the end of phase 2. Then it rolls over, and we spend a year on the sidelines because I had never been through an environment like that. So we stacked cash like everybody else. And at the time, we were making a lot more money. and our rentals were all profitable, right? We had a lot more rent on same amount of debt or less, so we were doing great. And then suddenly we realized that there were houses selling for $100,000 that were like that Norris Drive, which we bought for $107,000. And we're like, oh my God, there are houses going for less than what we bought our first one for. Maybe we should start looking at this again. I'm like, duh. So we started nibbling on the way down, and by any stretch we were early, but you never know when these markets are going to turn. So we bought stuff at 100 all the way down to $35,000.
Wow.
And then out of nowhere, that's kind of phase 3. And then out of nowhere, I remember it was like yesterday, some big hedge funds or really deep pocket individuals came in and just bought everything. Right there used to be dozens of REO listings a day in my market, which I would scour quickly, and suddenly there were none left, and then there were none left for a week, and then it was a month, and basically what happened is these hedge funds got in contact with all the REO agents and said they'd pay asking, and the market changed overnight. So then we sit tight for another year because you just never know if the hedge funds are for real or how deep their pockets are or whatever. But then what happens there is the third phase ends and the seller's market, which we are now, I believe, ending, takes off. So we have a 5-year run. Our net worth explodes. Cash flow is stronger because inflation's kicking in. At that point, my wife retires because no longer are we actively buying, right? We were buying, something a month there for a long time. But once you start doing that and you start having $20,000 repair bills, you can really start to live off your cash flow. So she retires probably in 2013-ish, maybe 14. And, we just keep riding the wave. We had a couple of things on the way up, but not much. And then it gets to the point in 2018 where it's like, you know what? I'm done.
Real quick question. So when you said when you retired, do you mean you just retired from your W-2 job or retired from investing?
Oh, that's a good question. So I guess I should be clear. My wife gives me a hard time for that too. So I guess retirement from a job.
Okay.
Right? I remember it's funny. So I retired at 45. I remember telling everybody I was retired. I had 2 days where I was really excited and I felt like I had that Joker smile across my face. It was just never going away. But then I went through a depression, or kind of like, what are you doing, you idiot? You're 45. You're a type A personality. Go get a job, you lazy bum. Your internal talk is terrible, right? It was horrible. So I had to make a decision. I had to go do something. So I made a couple of choices. The first choice on the real estate front is I would go after some owner financing deals to see if I can add more to my portfolio, which I've done. The second thing is I've never flipped anything, so I wanted to prove that I could flip properties properly, and more specifically, I could create a niche that no one else serves, which I've done. I turned slumlord properties into pride of ownership rentals. Lots of people flip for FHA buyers. I think that's not a market I want to serve. So I like to help landlords. So I buy slumlord properties and spend $50,000 and sell them to landlords after they're leased. So that's what I do. And then more importantly, even those things, that only takes like 5 hours a week because again, I outsource everything. So now I spend my time helping people, going on podcasts. I wrote a book, but it's time to give back. And that's the thing that feeds my soul now. I talked earlier that your job doesn't feed your soul. You have to find something that does that. And when you do that, it doesn't feel like work. So that's why I often say I'm retired, because this conversation, this isn't work to me. This is two guys talking about real estate and money and finances and helping people. How can that be work? So that's who I am.
You mentioned about alligators, and I'm not sure if our listeners caught on to that, but this is something that you discuss in your book, One Rental at a Time. Can you share with our listeners what an alligator is and why that's important?
Yeah, so let's give you the full story, right? Because we're friends at this point, right? So the word alligator, I had to create an image because I've been a sales guy my whole life, and I know that when you can tie a picture to a story, it resonates more. So we've all heard negative cash flow. I dare say that most of us think negative cash flow is bad. However, especially if you live in California like all three of us do, we have all heard, and maybe, I hope not, but maybe one of you have said, it's okay, my appreciation will protect me. So it was probably 2006. I've been doing real estate for 5 or 6 years now. I go into an office of a buddy of mine who's a VP, so he's a couple levels above me. And on his whiteboard, he's got these addresses. They're out-of-state addresses, but I recognize them as real estate. And he proudly goes on to declare that he can afford to have 5 properties that negative cash flow $200 a month. And he is a proud young man. He's like, I can afford $1,000 negative. And I'm like, well, why the freaking heck would you want to do that? Well, because appreciation's going to protect me. And I'm like, really? So I couldn't talk him out of it. He was, shoot, what do I know? He was 2 levels above me, far smarter, much better looking, whatever you want to say. He ends up doing that. Then lo and behold, 2008 happens. Guess what? Suddenly those properties are worth half or 40% what he paid. Now, technically, he could still afford them. But guess what? When your mortgage is $200 and the asset's worth $100, suddenly the idea of a strategic default becomes pretty attractive. And you know what? It is my understanding that he let all 5 of those go, because why would you want to hold on to an asset that's worth half and your belief it's never going to come back? So I have created, and actually the first thing I did when I left work was I paid an artist friend of mine to create an alligator who is chewing on bags full of money and gold coins. And I actually printed it on my shirt. It's my icon on Facebook. I put it everywhere I can because alligators are bad. And I need people to realize, especially in California, appreciation is not part of any of my calculations. Stop it. Take it out of your spreadsheet. People are going to go bankrupt. If you invested the last 5 years in California, appreciation saved your butt. Guess what? The market's different. If you're buying above the median now as a flipper, you're toast, because the prices are going to come down 5, 6, 7%. Your hard money costs are 12%, and some of you are going to lose money. So don't ever bet on appreciation. Hence my vigor and passion about educating people that alligators are always bad.
I'm glad you clarified that, because it's a really hot topic amongst, different mastermind groups, as well as Facebook and Bigger Pockets forums about, cash flow and appreciation. And I think, from somebody who has lived multiple cycles, it's important to note that, you're not oblivious to it, but it doesn't get factored into the conversation when you're first analyzing the deal. One of my mentors, he was kind of talking about how you have to consistently take action and go as far as your eye can see. And once you get there, you're going to be able to see further. So I think that fits in nicely with the whole one rental at a time concept. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Michael, I just have another question for you about, we hear a lot of advice for newbies, but this is a more selfish thing because I've been doing real estate for 5 years. Do you have any words of wisdom for people who've been doing real estate for a little bit and, looking to get to that next level, like the transitions that you've made over your 15-year career?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that often happens in the middle, if you will. There's 2 things that happen. First and foremost, and this is true if you're a newbie or not, real estate's going to test you. I believe real estate wants to kick everybody out of the game, right? Maybe after this question, we'll talk about what happened to me on that first investment. And I promise you, most of the people that hear my story of my first investment would have never made a second investment. So we can talk about that next. But I bring that up because real estate tests you. And it doesn't matter if you're in it 5 years or 15 years. Real estate's going to test you. And some days you're going to go like, God, this thing is too freaking hard. I don't know what I'm doing. But it's just bad, right? So you got to let that self-talk go. You got to realize that, yes, there is a finish line. It is out there. The other thing to realize at 5-year mark is you're almost there. The first 5 years, the cash flow is inconsequential. You've had probably no rent increases, no real mortgage pay down. You probably haven't been able to do any 1031s. Your refis, you probably haven't done any cash out refis yet. But at the 5-year mark, you're getting right on the cusp of doing some things special. I didn't see any meaningful cash flow until year 9. And that's because I just kept buying, right? When you buy a junker, you consume a lot of cash flow fixing the junker. And yeah, you could tell yourself that, but still when you go file your taxes and you do all these things, you're like, God, I'm still have this huge carry forward loss. And all these things happen when you have a decent W-2, and you're just like, God, is this working? I don't get it. But yeah, again, meaningful cash flow typically shows up for most people at year 9. At least it did for me. At year 5, you're almost there. You're one half cycle. Right. I think if interest rates collapse, which they probably will in a year and a half after the next recession, you go back and refi, lock in new 30-year money, you recast the loans, your cash flow explodes, and life is good. You're almost there.
That's great advice. No, I really appreciate that.
Let's actually talk about your first rental and the lessons learned from that one.
Yeah, so that's again, I share this story, and obviously it has a happy ending, so you don't have to feel too bad for me, but it is a horrible story. So to set it up, we spent all 2002 shopping for a rental property in the Bay Area. Why? Because that's what the books told us to do, right? Buy within 30 minutes of your home. I didn't know any better. All I did was read books. And then at some point during that year, after 52 weeks, Olivia goes, this is clearly not working. We got to go somewhere else. We draw a map, and then Fresno pops up, right? We've already talked about that. And then we drive down there, and I buy Norris Drive, right? We are so excited, right? Think about that. Think about spending 15 months banging on something, not knowing if it's real, and then you get it. You sign the deal. It closes. You know how excited you are? Then somebody moves in. They pay you first month in deposit. You are friggin' exploding with excitement, right? Just think about that. And then real estate tests you. 2 weeks into that first tenant there, without us knowing, they break up, husband, wife. Wife takes off. We never hear from her again, right? She moves to Arizona or Texas. The husband does not take that well. The husband decides to turn to the bottle and make drinking his Olympic sport. He not only begins drinking, but starts destroying our house. And as I've shared earlier, I invest in California, which means I need to go through an eviction because he never pays me another penny. We have 3 months of no rent and utter destruction of our house. We finally get him out. It's been 6 months. I don't know, 5 months, right? Whatever it's been. We got 1 month rent and 1 deposit. And now we got this broken house that we have to spend $15,000 fixing. Think about that. What would most people do? Most people would go, this is not for us. Fresno's a hellhole. I don't want to go there. It's too far away. Blah, 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 blah. None of those things are true, but that's what most people would think. My wife looks at me, Olivia. She goes, let's just keep going. On to the next one. Cost of doing business. And sure enough, she was right. We moved another tenant in there. They stayed there the whole time we owned it, never missed rent. We ended up selling it and buying an apartment building with all that extra equity thanks to Bank of America and IndyMac just raising the prices of houses. So it has a great ending story, but I promise you, that's our story of Norris Drive. You listening to this, most of you would have given up. Most of your relationships would have given up. The only reason we didn't is because Olivia and I were in this 100% together. If she was in this 99%, or heaven forbid, I was in this 99%, it would have broken us. We would have sold it at a loss, we would have lost money, and we would have gone back to the stock market and it would have kicked our ass again. So, real estate tests you. It tests me all the time. But I've just learned to expect it and go, oh, this is another test. Time to keep moving forward. And things get better. So that's my story with Norris Drive.
So we're kind of nearing the end of our show. So before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Oh, I think there's 2 things, right? If you ever, there's 2 things that I do when I give back. Right? As I shared earlier, I have my, I spend a couple hours a day or a week flipping stuff, but I don't do any of the work, right? I don't pick up a hammer. I don't do any of that stuff. So what I do to fill up most of my days is I produce content for my YouTube channel called One Rental at a Time. I do daily videos. I've told myself I'm doing at least 1 video a day. So usually I do that in the morning, sometime between 6:30 and 7:30, right? Because I'm a morning person. So please subscribe. I have 4 kind of different themes that I do. One is called subscriber questions. That's a big one for me. All you have to do is on any video, leave a comment that says, question, and leave your question. To date, I've answered every question within 72 hours because sometimes I have interviews or I'm traveling and I can't get to them. But again, I answer every question. I do interviews. I make a point to get interviews from all different types and all different people. Something I'm doing this week, I think it's on Wednesday or Thursday, is interviewing a lawyer, right? We haven't had a lawyer on yet, so I'm getting a lawyer on. Then I do something called Real Talk, right? Because there's a lot of headlines and press and noise around real estate. So sometimes I find an article that either A, I'm happy about, or B, pisses me off, and I just share with the world what I think. And then every now and again, I'll walk through my properties and do my deal. I'm heading down to Fresno tomorrow, so you'll probably see me do some walkthrough videos tomorrow. But that's what I do. That's it, right? It's one of those 4 topics, so every day. And then the other thing is, I would ask people watching this who think, this guy's legit and he's real. I'd ask you to do 2 things. First, go to Amazon, and you can search by my name, Michael Zuber, and what you're going to see is a book pops up called One Rental at a Time. You can either buy it paperback for $14.99, or if you have a Kindle, for $9.99. I'd ask you to order it. But more importantly, after you read it, please leave feedback. In order to get this book out to everybody who needs to read it, it needs to get those 5-star reviews, so it goes higher in the rankings, and it really can be that impactful piece, that Rich Dad was for me. It can help change people's lives, because again, I'm here helping people that have 40-hour-a-week jobs. I don't want you quitting your job. I want you to understand that if you use rental properties as a side hustle, you can leave your job in 10 or 15 years, and that's what I hope the book does for people.
Well, I'll have all that information in our show notes below. That wraps up our show for this week. If you thought that was helpful, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you may be listening. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Bigger Cashflow Podcast. Please remember that opinions of the guests are their own, and nothing on this show should be considered personal or professional advice. Please consult your tax, legal, or financial advisor for personal advice that fit your unique situation. See you next time.